The biggest challenge, without a doubt, is to keep pace with language change. No question. That is the difficulty. Always has been a difficulty with teaching, but it's particularly a difficulty now, given that language is changing so fast. It's changing for two reasons. One reason, the internet, which is indeed fostering new varieties and new experiences faster than ever before. You know, in the old days, if you invented a new word, it could take a generation before the rest of the world knew about that new word. If you invent a new word today and put it on Facebook, everybody knows about it within 24 hours, less. And so language is moving faster, and teachers have got to keep pace with this because their students are already ahead of them. You must have had this experience, you know, the kind of language that you use all the time, every day, whether it's English or Serbian or whatever, is often not the language that your teachers know because they're the generation older and they're just not familiar with it until you tell them. And this is the sort of thing that's going to happen to your students, you see, in due course. New slang, new words, new expressions are going to come in. The other big trend in language change is the globalization of English. The fact of the matter is that you and your students will go out into the big wide world and encounter what in the English language? Well, if you've been teaching your students that there is only one kind of English, and that is British English, and the only kind of accent is received pronunciation, which is the accent of the Queen, and so on, and you say that's the only kind of English you will hear out there, you are going to be so wrong, because only 2% of the population of England speaks RP, and worldwide, that proportion grows a little bit, but even so, the vast majority of the accents and dialects that you'll hear as you travel around the world, you don't even have to travel, just turn on the television set or go to the cinema. And what you'll hear is, of course, a lot of American English, a lot of, if it's Indian cinema, a lot of Indian English, and so on. Stand in any high street anywhere in the world where English is an important language. Oxford Street in London. I've done this. I've just stood there and listened to the variety of accents and dialects that pass me by, and the variety of other languages too, of course. And what I hear, every now and then, 1 in 100 passes by with the educated accent that we are often teaching our students to use. So, for teachers, the important thing is that you retain that respect for the traditional accent, reason being that that's the accent probably you've been taught. Or, of course, if you've been taught American English, that's a different scenario, but the same principle applies there. Or Australian English, the same principle, that there will be one accent that you know, that you respect because your teachers have taught it to you, you've heard it more than anything else, the examiners have examined you in it, the teaching materials are in it, and if you know RP and British Standard English, fine. No change there. You'll carry on doing that because it's a perfectly respectable accent and dialect. But, if you let your students go away thinking that is the only accent and dialect in the world, then you've done them a disservice. What you've got to do is improve their listening comprehension and reading comprehension from the very beginning. You've got to expose them to as much of the variation that exists in English as it's possible to do. Now, which varieties will you choose of the hundreds that are out there? What will you choose? Well, that's up to you to decide. That's your main decision, you or the institution for which you will work. You'll obviously choose American English as well as British English because that's so obvious. I mean, because of films and television and all the rest of it, you have to do that. But whether you then choose to expose your students to South African English or Australian English or Indian English will depend very much on your view as to where these students are likely to go, how often they're likely to encounter those situations. Are these varieties going to be useful? And even if they're not, it's worthwhile spending a little bit of time just dropping them into a scenario where you've never heard anything like this before, guys. And you just play them a bit of, say, Indian English or Nigerian English or something like this. And just let them flounder a bit. And then sort out some of the differences, point to some of the differences and say, notice this, notice this. It tunes the ears, you know, it gets them ready for difference. That's the point about language change. It makes yourself ready to encounter anything. and forget that old notion that there is just one kind of thing that you would want to call correct English. Now, footnote here. That's the philosophy of the classroom. But when you're training the kids to do the examinations, then you have to be a bit more conservative, because examining boards are notoriously conservative. And, you know, I wouldn't put "I'm loving it" into an exam just yet.
Implicit in what you're saying is another challenge for teachers, whether teaching now or teaching in the future, how to keep up. And bear in mind, they're not linguists with time to analyse all that's going on. How does a busy teacher keep up with the changes in the language and perhaps changes in pedagogy?
I've no idea. I mean, this is your problem, it's not mine. I thank the Lord every day that I am not a teacher. I said in the lecture just a little while ago, you know, if I were in charge of the world, I would want the world to recognize there are two most important jobs in the world. The most difficult jobs in the world are not brain surgery and nuclear physics and so on. They're easy. No, the two big jobs are, first of all, translating and interpreting, and secondly, language teaching. And the reason is because no aspect of human behavior is more complex than language. It is the most complex thing you will ever do. Those of you who have learned 2 languages or 3 or 5, you've done the job 3 or 5 times over. But think what's coming out of my mouth now, you know, 40 odd sounds, phonemes, whatever you call them, combined into several hundred syllables, superimposed, there's all sorts of intonation and rhythm and stress and so on, combined into 3,000 or 4,000 grammatical constructions with how many words? 50,000, 100,000 words, depending upon the size of your vocabulary, but at least 50,000 words for average speakers of English. And it's all coming out, along with all the politeness and the discourse features and the rhetoric and the jokes and so on. It's all there, you know, and you do it in 2 languages, or 3, or 5. And, you know, remember, 3/4 of the world's population is bilingual. To be monolingual is the exception around the world. And so here we have a situation, and you have to teach it. Well, good luck, you know.
And just briefly, your recommendation, what government should do about teacher salaries?
Oh, if I were in charge of the world, yes. The biggest bit of applause I got in the lecture in there this morning was when I said that teachers' salaries should be increased by a factor of at least 4. You know, 4 times the amount. But that, I said, I'm not in charge of the world, so that isn't going to happen. But that is the point, you know, that kind of complex professionalism needs to be reflected in salary scales and all sorts of things. And there has to be time, you see. That's it. You have to find the time to do effectively the research into the question. Well, of course, not everybody has to do it. If a group gets together, they can hammer out a syllabus and focus on these global differences quite quickly. There are books out there now and courses called Global and things of that kind which are trying to do this for you. So some of the job has already been done. But the job is now much easier than it was a decade ago. And the reason is the internet. So once upon a time, if you decided that you wanted to teach or talk or expose the students to, say, South African English, well, how would you have done that apart from going to South Africa or something? These days it's so easy. Just type South African English into Google and up will come the latest South African newspapers, the audio will be there. Heck, if you really want to get into South African English, you just call up a school in South Africa and they will have a Skype interaction with you and you can hear the thing, you know, live. It's so easy now. All it needs is a bit of organizing and a bit of money, of course, because you've got to get the equipment and everything. But the job is becoming easier as a result of the internet. It will take a bit of time, but it's time that you only need to spend once. You know, once you've done this basic work and got the contacts and got your materials, then you'll use it next year and next year and next year. You don't have to do it twice. So I think it's an initial problem, but not a long-term one.